This is the 12th Super Smash Bros. Melee tier list. Overall, it's a pretty decent list, but there are a few quirks to it. Captain Falcon has fallen out of the top 7 in favor of the Ice Climbers, Yoshi is in the D tier alongside the good Marios, and some of the low tiers just look a little out of place. If you've been playing competitive Melee for a while, say since December 2015 when this tier list came out, you probably have an idea of why these aspects of the 12th Melee tier list aren't quite representative of Melee's metagame, at least how we think we know it today. But even if you don't really follow Melee, there is one last quirk about the 12th tier list that might actually look familiar to you. In fact, it's probably the reason you clicked on this video. The 12th Melee tier list is the first and only tier list to feature Fox McCloud in a tier of his own.
Come on!
Although Fox has sat comfortably in the first position of the tier list since its 8th iteration, the SS tier of the 12th tier list marked a new level of distinction for the character. It signaled a period of extremely high Fox sentiment, and it ushered in a new era of competitive Melee, 20XX. 20XX is a joke/ideology which was popularized by former Captain Falcon player Aziz Haxamani Al-Yami, following his switch from Captain Falcon to Melee's perennial toppest tier. The theory of 20XX asserts that as Melee players get better at the game and converge towards perfect play, Fox, the game's theoretically best character, will increasingly come to dominate top-level play, or as Toph puts it,
"The year is 20XX. Everyone plays Fox."
This notion that Fox dominates competitive Melee, which to some extent he does, is an idea that has come to define Melee's cultural imprint on the world of gaming. And while Fox absolutism has always been around in some way or another, the sheer Foxaganda of the mid-2010s alongside the peak of Melee's popularity as a competitive game truly cemented Fox's position as Mr. Melee. Today, however, things have receded. And while Fox is still number 1, still popular, and still winning tournaments, he just doesn't quite feel as inevitable or looming as he once did. Even still, the SS tier of the 12th tier list remains a historical artifact in Melee's history. It is our fun little reminder of the time when Fox was a spooky, existential threat of a guy. And that's why tier lists are interesting, at least to me. Despite their limitations, they're the super condensed summaries of a game's metagame history. Tier lists have always been around in one form or another since the dawn of gaming, because winning feels great, and winning is easiest when you're playing as the strongest guy, gal, or thing. And while most games these days operate on periodic update cycles that leave who or what is strongest up to ever-changing debate, Melee has been played for over 2 decades on just one version of the game. And it's not even the latest one. But even without updates, there's never been true historical consensus on where each character ranks in Melee. In the grand tapestry of Melee's tier list history, the iterative encoding of years of metagame theory, player sentiment, and tournament success reduces all of that shit into a series of tables that are 26 columns each and are easy to digest. So how does each character fare across Melee's 13 tier lists? Today, we'll be looking at Melee's top tiers. Only 2 characters have had the privilege of being graced with the number 1 rank on Melee's tier list. For the past 6 tier lists, this has been Fox, but before him, a different character was the face of Melee, Sheik. Sheik and Fox have always been evidently powerful since the very beginning. During the early years, both characters held properties that smashers of the early noughts were quite fond of: high speed and movesets filled with quick and powerful attacks. And because of this, the two have a long track record of being paired closely together towards the top of the rankings. But for the first several years of the game, Fox's strengths were seen as more theoretical, while Sheik's strengths were almost immediately practical. Compared to Fox, Sheik sported a more intuitive combo game, with moves such as down tilt and forward tilt easily comboing into killing blows, or her down throw comboing into strong hits or itself. And overall, Sheik's handle offered more ease of use, making her a relatively simpler character to control and execute with. As such, Sheik quickly became well represented in competitive play, with old school players like Reciferous, Captain Jack, and Dai Superfly demonstrating the initial foundation of her metagame. But by 2006, Fox would overtake her. By this time, Fox players had begun to catch up, and as the game's competitive player base improved in skill, the theoretical aspects of Fox's gameplay slowly started to become more material. Ever since then, Sheik has made a slow descent down the tier list, with her most recent placement on the 13th tier list also being her lowest. Unfortunately, Sheik has lacked the same representation at the highest levels of play that she once had, and since her drop from number 1, no Sheik has won a major tournament during a subsequent tier list era. But things are looking up for the next tier list, because on January 22nd, 2023, 2 years after the release of the most recent tier list, Jmook became the first Sheik main to win a major tournament in over 19 years. And let me tell you, that boy is fucking spicy.
Then cross up tilt or something. I don't know. He just makes it as complicated as possible. But I was talking about Moki. Jmook is.
Oh no! That was a full combo.
Hey, I ain't got nothing to say, man.
In today's landscape, Fox, Marth, Jigglypuff, Falco, Sheik, Captain Falcon, and Peach pretty decisively make up the game's top tier roster. But of the 7, 2 characters were a bit late to the party. The first, Captain Falcon, started out being placed 15th, 12th, and then 11th twice on the first 4 tier lists, making him a mid-tier. These lower rankings were due to the fact that his sheer ground speed made him seem incredibly unwieldy as a character, and moreover, his relatively linear recovery compared to the rest of the other top tiers was seen as a defensive blemish. But in 2003, and for several years onwards, the fabled enigma Isaiah began showing the masses what Captain Falcon could truly be capable of, demonstrating control over a character that many saw as fundamentally inconsistent. Since Isaiah, Falcon has seen healthy representation from other top players, such as the early greats Darkreign and Silent Spectre, and in today's day, the trio of Wizrobe, Nun, and S2J. While his position on the tier list has ebbed and flowed slightly, Falcon sticks close to the 6th slot. Ever since the 5th tier list, he has only dropped outside of the top 7 once. The second character to be a late bloomer was Jigglypuff, whose top tier status was the last to be recognized. In fact, initially, Puff debuted as a low tier, ranking all the way down at 17th on the first tier list. And while she did receive a boost up to the mid-tier in the following edition, it wouldn't be until 7 iterations later that she would finally be placed amongst the top 7. The reason for her delay was pretty simple. While Melee's earlier days certainly saw their fair share of solid Puff players such as Chosen One, Kish Prime, or Killa OR, for a long time, Jigglypuff lacked a true champion who could carry her up the tier list. Her first notable jump from the 8th tier list to the 9th can largely be attributed to the Canadian player King, whose solid placements on the MLG circuit and exquisite combo game helped Puff break into the top 7. But it would be shortly after when Puff would start to see gold, after a certain Puff main by the name of Mango cropped out of nowhere and almost immediately started taking names. And then, not long after, another player would start winning with Puff as well. Hungrybox, whose streak of dominance and continued success has cemented Puff as one of Melee's best characters. Funny enough, on March 31st, 2004, an April Fool's version of what would be the 6th tier list at the time was released. And of the several odd decisions featured on this version of the tier list, one particular joke would end up being not like the others. Besides Fox, Marth and Falco have the steadiest tier list histories, with both characters averaging somewhere in between 3rd and 4th on the ranking. Currently, on the latest tier list, Marth sits at a relatively high 2nd, while Falco sits at a relatively low 4th. But for both characters, neither placement is unprecedented. Since the beginning, Marth and Falco have been well represented in competitive Melee, both across the general field of play and amongst the tippy top of competition. Marth and Falco are just plain good. So, to be perfectly honest, neither character's tier list history features any particularly major stories. That being said, both characters can be used as good examples of how tournament placements and tier list rankings are often correlated. Between the two, Marth and Falco have experienced 3 slight but notable tier list winters. Before Ken, when Marth players typically adopted a very swingy, now seen as quite newbie playstyle. Before PC Chris, when Falco just didn't have the placements to justify him higher up. And finally, for several years around the era of the 5 Gods, where Marth just wasn't really winning at tournaments. Now, all things considered, these quote-unquote slumps are quite tame, but even still, they make a common trend clear. Lack of wins means dips on the tier list, at least usually. Peach is quite possibly the only character in Melee whose tier list position is negatively correlated with tournament success, and not just ordinary tournament success, but some of the greatest tournament results of all time. Although Peach was placed low at 9th on the first tier list, she was quickly moved up to 4th on the second after players realized that Peach hits like a fucking truck. Down smash is Peach's most notorious move, and when it was coupled with crouch canceling, a technique that allows characters to tank hits, Peach players could have an extremely strong counterattack during a time when players still had sloppy offense. Moreover, Peach's float cancel, which let Peach end her moves early by simply landing on the ground, allowed Peach to have a surprising speed to her offense, which let her throw out attacks quickly and safely. These perks were good enough for Peach to hover a bit below the middle of the top tiers, but it wasn't quite enough for Peach to find significant tournament success. This would change, however, with one Swedish teenager. Armada, one of Melee's greatest players of all time, took Peach to her highest achievements in Melee history, achievements which remain above and beyond anything that has been accomplished with the character since. But despite building one of Melee's best tournament resumes, Peach's placement on the tier list actually slipped alongside Armada's tournament success. From the 10th to the 12th tier list, Peach fell to a new low of 6th, and on the most recent tier list, Peach has dropped to the bottom of the top tiers, at an all-time low of 7th. So, what gives? Well, for one, it's worthwhile to contrast Armada's success with the character alongside his pessimism with her. Starting in 2015, Armada began to play Fox to help cover some of Peach's weaker matchups, and since then, he suggested that Peach's limitations prevent her from succeeding consistently on her own, a sentiment that has likely contributed to some diminished faith in the character. But it's also worth noting that her slip in the tier list may also simply be the consequence of other top tiers having rising sentiment. After all, the tier list order is a zero-sum game. Either way, Peach's competitive metagame is far from stagnant, and relative to her general popularity, she is quite successful in the modern era, even after Armada's retirement in 2018. Will she move up one day? We'll just have to wait and see. At the end of the day, there's only so much you can actually glean from examining tier lists though. The number of decisions, experiences, and ideas that make up any given tier list are far too vast to be truly explainable. But even if the stories we tell about tier lists are mere grasps at vibes, there's still a lot of value in having such an accessible form of narrative. Because people are lazy, people like vibes, and boy do people ever enjoy sorting things into lists. Thanks for watching.